Okay, so you're having random black screens, blue screens, or random reboots. This guide might help you determine what the cause is. Um, it's dangerous to work inside your machine, so you could make static discharges and damage components in there. So before you even start, make sure that you're grounded. Like when you touch the machine, make sure you touch the case so that any static on you is eliminated. That's what I do anyway. I can't guarantee you aren't going to hurt your case or anything or your computer, but that's what I do. I touch the case before I get in, and then I power it off and I remove all of the power cord. That way I have no power going into the system, and that's what I do anyway. And I just want to let you know that after you get your new machine, the first thing you should do is run a check on the CPU and GPU, basically checking the temperature when it's under a high stress for the GPU and CPU. For this, I download a program called Core Temp and FurMark. Core Temp would display the temperatures of the CPU, and the FurMark allows you to do two tests, one for CPU and one for GPU. If your temperatures go over 80 degrees on the CPU, that's pretty bad. Um, and you should fix the problem with the CPU cooler. I have a video on that. The GPU, mine runs around 60, 65. I think most people are running around 70s. So if you're in that range, you're in pretty good shape. If you're in the 90s, like the CPU, there's probably overheating on a GPU as well. And I don't know how you revive that except for maybe putting more fans in the case. That's the only way I could figure that to be repaired. Okay, so if you have high temperatures on the CPU or GPU, if you're not capable of doing the troubleshooting from there, you may want to return the unit that you bought. If you bought it from Best Buy, there's a pretty good return policy, and some of the other, like Dell and all those guys. Because if your CPU or GPU is overheating, that's a pretty serious problem. In my case, here I show my CyberPower video where I replaced the CPU cooler with a new one, and it fixed my problem. I was running at 100 degrees Celsius. I removed the old CyberPower CPU cooler and I put in a Arctic 34 Dual, and my CPU temperatures dropped down to below 70. So that's what I did to resolve my problem. That doesn't mean that you can resolve your problem that way. You may have a totally different problem, but that's what I did. Okay, here we use FurMark and Core Temp to test our CPU and GPU levels. Basically, Core Temp will show all the temperatures of all the cores and CPU, and FurMark actually runs stress tests against the GPU and the CPU. And from what I did here, I pretty much got a maximum CPU temp of 77, and then it fell back to 75. I'm also having an editor run at the same time, so it does put a lot of stress on the CPU. And then after we run the CPU test, which I'm running right now, we'll run the GPU test, and then it'll come up with a screen that'll show you frames per second and how hot the GPU gets. So we just run this for a little while. You should run it for like 10 minutes or so. On an air-cooled system, it pretty much gets to the max temps right away. Like if you notice, I got to 76 at one point, 77. That's probably the max for this system. I've never seen it get any higher than that. I'm actually surprised it got that high. Um, and then FurMark, I have my resolution on the CPU set to 2304 by 1440. That's the highest I can go on this FurMark, well, at least for my monitor anyway. And I set the when I do the GPU test, I do a preset test at 1440. That's probably why this is running a little hotter than normal, because I never really tested it with the resolution that high. Now you do the other test, and you can see that it's going to run a GPU test in a second. First, you hit the preset, and it's not showing, but there are some statistics coming on the screen, and I guess I don't have the whole screen captured at this point, but you'll see frames per second and GPU gets. My GPU got to 62 degrees at the high peak, and at the end they'll give you a little report. I'll show you that in a second here. So there you go. That's how you test your CPU and GPU for high temps. You use this application. Also turn off VSync globally. Here I show the screen on the NVIDIA control panel. You go to Manage 3D Settings, and on the bottom it says Vertical Sync. Make sure that's turned off. Okay, one of the first things you want to do when you're troubleshooting is make sure you have the correct drivers. Basically, you get a manual with your system, like in CyberPower instance, I got a manual, and it has the model number I show here. It's a Gigabyte motherboard, and it has the model number, so you search the site for that model number. You go to service and support on the site. It could be ASUS, it could be MSI, it could be ASRock, any of those, and you basically search Google for that that model number and put driver after it in Google, and it should find your driver. Then you select your operating system. In my case, it was Windows 11, but it only had Windows 10 drivers, so I selected Windows 10. And then it shows a list of drivers. Now, you want the newest driver, like so if there's a LAN driver, you want the latest one. You don't want the older ones. And just download all the drivers you can that you know you're going to need. The only one I would not install or try to upgrade is the firmware at first. You don't want to mess with the firmware if you don't have to. Basically do all the other drivers and you'll be fine. Sometimes the model numbers are a little off and you can still use the same drivers because it has the same components like sound and stuff. So that's what you do first. In Windows, there's a thing called game mode. You want to disable that. Don't turn that on right now. One of the apps that Gigabyte gives you is called Game Boost. You don't want to enable that yet either. Just leave that turned off for now. Powered can wreak havoc with your system. Reboots, black or blue screens can occur. The only way I know of testing one is to replace it with a known good one. You can do the following. I will also show you how I know how much power my CyberPower system uses. Alright, PC Parts Picker allows you to set up your system that you want to build, and basically what I did is I had my CyberPower PC and I found all the parts and I put it in PC Parts Picker. And one thing about PC Parts Picker is it will show you how much power the overall system uses, and here I show you what mine's using. It's just under 400 watts. To lower the required wattage that your system is using, I unplugged my hard drive, the mechanical one, the 1 terabyte, because I don't really use it, and that will give you about 10 watts, maybe 15 watts back. And in your blue and black screen troubleshooting, at least you're cutting back the power a little bit. If you added anything else besides the CP cooler fan, which is required, I would disable as much as I can that you added in. If you put RGB lights or something, let's say, you just disable that and try to get the power down to a minimum and see if you get blue and black screens or reboots after that occurs. But there's not much else you can do. That's about it. The next thing you can do is check your memory from within Windows. You basically type Windows memory in your spyglass on the bottom of Windows 11, and it'll come up with this application that I'm going to show you here. And what you do is, after you say, yeah, run it, it'll have to restart the machine, and it'll check your memory. You'll see a screen come up after and it starts checking memory. You could also do an enhanced memory scan, which I show you here, the screen. but it runs a standard scan if you just do it from within Windows itself. But you could also stop this test and run another scan with extended memory testing. And if it passes that, it's pretty good chance that your memory's fine. I'll show you another thing to do after this. And on this screen, I show you that my 2 memory modules and my 4 slots there, 2 are empty, 2 are full. And what you do is basically you make sure the power's turned off, the computer's unplugged. You go in there and you remove the right memory chip. You put all the power back together and you run your test to see if you get the blue screens or black screens. If you're good, you know one of the memory chips is bad. Now, if that doesn't work, you shut down the machine, you unplug it again, and you take the left memory chip out and replace it with the right one. And you do the same test. You plug everything back in, you see if it still gets blue or black screens or if it reboots. And most likely these memory chips are fine if you got past the other test, but this is another way you can test. Make sure you know which slots you put the memory in and took them out of, and put them back in after you're done. And make sure the power and the power cable is removed whenever you mess with anything inside the machine. Okay, and finally, I haven't done this before, so don't ask me about it, but I read that some people have trouble with the XMP in the BIOS, the Extreme Memory Profile. My memory is 3200 speed, and the Extreme Profile automatically configures the memory for that. I heard that some people switched their memory down to 2900 and it worked and it didn't crash their machine anymore. I don't know how to do it, but in the BIOS there's a profile 1 and you could click it and it says disable, and I guess you could do a system memory multiplier and set it to 2900. I'm not sure about the timing or anything like that, but this is another thing that people said caused blue and black screens, is basically the memory couldn't handle the 3200 or whatever speed you're running at. Your memory might be 3100, 3000 or whatever, but they lowered it about 300 points and it seemed to stop their problems with blue screens and black screens and stuff. So you can go look into that. I'm not going to look into that. If it was up to me and I got blue screens and black screens from the base install of, let's say, a CyberPower or whatever machine you got, I would basically return it back to the manufacturer. That's only if you do some of the simple things here and it doesn't seem to fix the problem, I would return it.